Hundreds of child predators are arrested this month as part of the DOJ's takedown of the largest known child exploitation website.
And this individual, the sole motivation was to inflict pain on another, and the journey to that.
We've been working on the story of a federal agent, a Border Patrol agent, now facing federal charges.
Welcome to Video was dismantled after the raid and arrest of the underground site's administrator, 23-year-old South Korean national Jong-Woo's son. In an operation by officials in the US, the UK, South Korea and Germany, hundreds of suspects have been charged across the world. More than 20 minors who were being abused by users of the site have been rescued. Officials say they seized more than 250,000 videos. That's staggering, with disturbing references to abuse of very young children and even toddlers. At a press conference, officials said it was one of the first times seeing cryptocurrency in trafficking child pornography.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessie Liu. I'm the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. Thank you all for being here for this very important announcement of significant actions to protect children from sexual exploitation. I'm joined today by key partners in the federal government's fight against those who exploit the most vulnerable among us.
That's the Department of Justice announcing that they've just managed to shut down the dark web's largest child pornography site in October of 2019. That fact still rings true as I'm recording this video in 2023. 337 pedophiles who produced, uploaded and downloaded content from said site were arrested and some jailed as the result of an operation carried out by the UK's National Crime Agency, the IRS, the Homeland Security, the Korean National Police and the German Federal Criminal Police. Although 337 arrests were made, there were roughly 1.3 million users at the height of the website's popularity, with 360,000 videos being downloaded. And believe it or not, in the words of the investigators themselves, if it wasn't for the blockchain, we wouldn't have even seen those 337 arrests. Could the investigation have gone a different way if not for the blockchain? Maybe, but the tactics used in the months-long investigation relied heavily on it, and so without the blockchain, there would have been no case. In spite of the fact that the Department of Justice eventually took down the largest child pornography site on the dark web in 2019, the origins of this case can be traced all the way back to 2008. July 24th, 2008. Freedom Hosting, a specialist web hosting service, emerges on the Tor browser. It offers a plethora of hidden services to only those who can navigate their way around the darkest side of the internet. Back in 2008, there wasn't many who could. Some notable services: Tormail, which allowed users to send and receive email anonymously to email addresses inside and outside the Tor network. HackBB, a hidden internet forum specializing in buying stolen credit cards, skimming ATMs, and hacking computers, servers, and accounts. And then there was the Hidden Wiki. This held a directory of links to other hidden websites within the Tor browser. Freedom Hosting would eventually be home to half of all Tor sites that were available at that time. It began to attract many visitors for both the right and wrong reasons. For example, those who wanted to communicate in secret could do so, but a wide range of criminals had a field day, and the authorities couldn't do anything about it because, to put it simply, for a while, they had no way of knowing anyone's true identity. Although for years, the web hosting service remained in the shadows of the dark web, away from the majority of the general public, that would all change in October of 2011.
Dear citizens of the Internet, over the past decade, the Internet has become an increasingly integral part of our daily lives. It has evolved into the catalyst behind free media, free speech and global communication. Since its inception, the World Wide Web has become a prominent medium for individuals such as journalists and activists alike. However, a great injustice lurks beneath the surface. A vile infestation of abhorrent animals have been growing, parasitically spreading like cancer. Unknown to the world, it has consumed and victimized innocent children as well as adults. The growing trade of child pornography has become a major problem. While government organizations have put much effort into the dismantling of individuals and websites dedicated to this repulsive trade, the providers of this content have grown frustrated and moved their trades into a much seedier place known as the Darknet, a network dedicated only to the iniquities that are outcasted by the society we strive in. Unfortunately, a potentially benevolent resource has been corrupted by these sick and sadistic abominations of the world. We, Anonymous, have an eternal duty to fight against the social injustices of this world. When we came into this virtual realm, we were disgusted with the content that was provisioned and readily available for the perverted masses. Many of us had lingering traumatic images of the material that these pedophiles were hiding on the Darknet. Anonymous took a pledge to defend the defenseless and fight for the fallen. We rallied an army called the Legion, and armed ourselves with our Chris Hansen cannons. We set out for the great hunt which has become Operation Darknet, also known as To Catch a Predator. We found that a majority of the Darknet pedophiles were using a site called Lolita City. We demanded that the major provider of the host known as Freedom Hosting rid their servers of such reprehensible materials. Unfortunately, to our horror, the owner of Freedom Hosting was the perpetrator for most of the pedophilic content. We are now aware that this provider has over 100 gigabytes of content depicting children being sexually exploited for money and sick thrills that only the underlying insects of this world could take pleasure in. While successful in our onslaught to identify users and take down the hosting provider of this unacceptable content, the Darknet is a vast sea with many providers. However, we fully intend to make it uninhabitable for these disgusting degenerates to exist without the fear of prosecution or death. This is our message, our manifesto. You may hold us to every last word, for we will never turn a deaf ear upon the screams of innocent children. You know who you are, and so do we. We are Anonymous. We are Legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.
On the 14th of October 2011, a member of the anonymous hacking group had been browsing the hidden wiki when they noticed a section titled Hard Candy, a directory of child pornography links. Disgusted by what they had just witnessed, the hacker quickly worked their magic and removed all links from Hard Candy. Job complete. Well, not exactly. You see, 5 minutes later, an admin on Hidden Wiki edited all of the links back in, and it was business as usual. Upon further investigation, the hacker noticed that 95% of the links listed on the Hidden Wiki shared a digital fingerprint with Freedom Hosting. And when the hacker redirected their efforts, they came to the conclusion that Freedom Hosting had been the home to the largest collection of child pornography on the internet, including the Love Zone, a site where Richard Huckle, dubbed Britain's worst paedophile, was an avid user on. The hacker would reach out to Freedom Hosting's unidentified owner to issue a warning to remove the content from their servers, but they refused. And so 4 hours later, a bunch of anonymous hackers assembled from forum boards such as 4chan, and they began to DDoS attack Freedom Hosting, rendering the service unusable. However, within 24 hours of the attack, Freedom Hosting's owner was able to restore services via a backup. In response, Anonymous issued several more warnings, but the owner refused once again. So a further DDoS attack took place, even after new security measures had been implemented. Was this it then? Were Anonymous about to shut down the largest host of child pornography on the Darknet? Well, yes and no. You see, Anonymous put out a final statement stating that they managed to grab a total of 190 unique IPs of people trying to gain access to Hard Candy and Lolita City, but ultimately the sites would continue to run moving forward. It's also unclear if any arrests were made as the result of the operation. But it would be something that happened 9 days earlier that really caught the media's attention in regards to this operation, and therefore the general public were made aware of it. At the height of the DDoS attacks, which prevented over 40 different child pornography websites from being accessed, the one that stood out from the rest was Lolita City, home to 100 gigabytes of child pornography images. The ages of the children ranged anywhere from newborn all the way through to 17-year-old teens. The content was being viewed thousands of times a day. On the 18th of October 2011, Anonymous managed to hack into Lolita City, meaning they had access to all 1,500 users of the site. Although their usernames were the only information to be leaked to the public, Anonymous stated that they had identified many of the users and had asked law enforcement to reach out for details. However, once again, it's unclear if any arrests were made as the result of this. Some would label Anonymous's operation a success. Others had called it a global advertisement for child pornography. You see, by July of 2013, just under 2 years on, even though you could only gain access by invite, Freedom Hosting, Hard Candy, Lolita City, and others had all grown tenfold. Another 160 child exploitation websites would emerge over that same period, but just as the sickening online communities were growing, they'd be shut down temporarily, all thanks to the FBI. I say temporarily because, sadly, ladies and gentlemen, although it was the end of the road for Freedom Hosting, the majority of the sites hosted would continue just elsewhere on the Darknet.
The Supreme Court has cleared the way for the extradition of a man accused of being the world's biggest facilitator of child abuse images. 33-year-old Eric Owen Marquez, who has an address at Mountjoy Square in Dublin 1, is wanted by the US authorities for conspiring to distribute and to advertise child abuse images. There was no stay on today's rulings, which means that he can be extradited immediately.
The country's highest court has now upheld the previous judgments of the High Court and the Court of Appeal, and Eric Owen Marquez has now exhausted all legal avenues. He has no time left. There was no stay put on today's Supreme Court ruling, and he can be extradited to the US to face child abuse charges immediately.
10 years on from Eric's arrest, and the details about how the FBI managed to track him down still remain a mystery. The only reference we have, Eric's US indictment, states that an investigation in 2013 found a key IP address linked to Freedom Hosting. After Eric's arrest, the FBI took over Freedom Hosting and kept things running briefly before shutting down the whole operation. Within that short period of time, they secretly deployed a JavaScript file to the majority of the sites hosted on Freedom Hosting. In simple terms, the script exploited a bug within the Tor browser, which bypassed the IP anonymization feature, therefore collecting real-world IP addresses of users accessing child exploitation websites. This information was then sent to an FBI-controlled server, and officials used the data to launch other investigations to track down other suspected pedophiles. Although Eric stated, "We do not give permission for any upload of any illegal files. If you choose to do so anyway, we are not responsible for your actions. I will not assist in any use of this server for illegal purposes. Sorry, I have to protect myself. And I do not consent to the use of the Freedom Hosting server for any illegal activities. If you do illegal activities on this server, I will not go to jail for you. If my identity is compromised and I am questioned/forced to cooperate to identify you, I will do it to ensure my freedom." The FBI still held him accountable, as did Anonymous, 2 years before, for hosting child exploitation websites. The latter going a step further, claiming that Eric himself had either A, been the owner of Lolita City, or B, had in some way been deeply connected with the site. Eric's response to the FBI was that he was simply an innocent party who hosted a range of different websites on the Darknet. The evidence doesn't suggest that Eric had owned Lolita City, but he most definitely wasn't the innocent party he claimed to be. When Garda officers raided his apartment in Dublin, Ireland, he made a dash for his computer in the hopes of turning it off, even though his PC, at that point, had been password locked. For those of you who aren't aware, when you turn your PC off, it erases the information stored on the RAM, and Eric was fully aware of this, so he attempted to shut down his PC, but officers stopped him from doing so. When the PC was forensically examined, the data from the RAM was pulled, and although they'd never crack into the PC itself, they had more than enough evidence to link him to Freedom Hosting. It wasn't just that though. You see, the data showed that Eric had been accessing a child pornography site that he hosted on Freedom Hosting 1,534 times. The site, reports say, had categories such as jailbait, preteen, toddlers, girls and boys. Each category contained numerous videos of child sexual abuse. Another website he viewed, which was once again hosted on Freedom Hosting, had been visited 412 times according to the data on the RAM. From images pulled from said site, 107 of them matched files on Eric's RAM. One of those was of an infant girl being abused. Eric was eventually charged with conspiracy to advertise and distribute child pornography on the Darknet by prosecutors over in Maryland in the United States of America. They called him the Kingpin of child porn after the FBI estimated that 8.4 million images and videos had surfaced via Freedom Hosting. It wasn't going to be an easy job securing a final sentence though, because as you know, he resided in Ireland. It took 6 years for his extradition to finally be granted, and on February 6th, 2020, he finally pleaded guilty to the charges that were placed against him. Eric Marquez was sentenced to 27 years in prison, followed by lifetime supervision upon release.
Well, the district court today imposed a sentence of 27 years followed by lifetime supervised release, which is an important message to send to not only to Eric Marquez, who, as you know, was the largest facilitator of child pornography in the world, but also in terms of general deterrence. That sentence sends a powerful message to those who are trading in child pornography or are contemplating trading in child pornography. Mr. Marquez essentially created a market for others to trade and promote child pornography. And he was creating the demand and the supply for a very dangerous and harmful trade to children throughout the world. And it was important to get a sentence that not only tells those out there that we will find you and hold you accountable for trading in child pornography, but also to the victims, to make sure they know that law enforcement here and overseas are committed to finding the criminals who exploit them, and then when we can, seeking restitution for them.
There were many who watched Anonymous temporarily take down Freedom Hosting and Lolita City in real time on 4chan. One of those, who would later go by the moniker Lux, wanted to help Anonymous in their fight against paedophilia, but had found himself on the side of those who he originally set out to attack. The great irony was that he was led there by the very people who were trying to expose it as evil. I discovered numerous forums that existed on the dark web. Before long, I was hooked. In Lux's early days with online paedophiles, he created a persona of an American pediatrician, claiming to have had numerous sexual encounters with children, as well as maintaining an ongoing sexual relationship with a specific 6-year-old child. The content he had consumed in his early days was far too tame though, if you can even imagine that. And so he struck up a plan to create his own website where more hardcore content could be posted with less moderation. By early 2013, Lux had created not just one Darknet site, rather a few. His name had rang bells in online paedophile groups. He was said to have been the go-to guy for anything paedophile related. It had even reached the point to where he was giving out advice to users on his sites. Some of the advice included topics such as how to groom and sexually abuse young children, how to ensure there were no signs of sexual penetration, how to drug children so they would be awake during the abuse but would have no memory of it afterwards, and how to kidnap, kill, and dispose of a child's body. He was everything nightmares were made of. The decision would be made to house all of the websites under one banner with a few new additions as Lux's website started to grow in popularity. Pedo Empire, a one-stop shop for all things paedophilia, hosted by yours truly, Freedom Hosting. Most nights when I got home from work, instead of sitting back and watching TV, I bust out my laptop and got working on Pedo Empire, hopefully creating something which makes the community at least a smidgen better. One of the most popular sites that was a part of his empire was Pedo Wiki. At the height of its popularity, it had over 3 million page views and contained over 1,200 different articles. Some of the sites on the empire required an invite from a trusted member to gain access. As a member, you would be allowed basic viewing privileges, but you'd have to prove yourself to gain access to more premium areas. For example, you'd have to share images or films that hadn't been previously uploaded to the Darknet. And trust me, Lux had his way of vetting such content. On other sites, if members wanted to stay active in a producer's lounge, they would have to show they were actively abusing children on a weekly basis, or else they'd be kicked. The never-before-seen footage would have to include children holding a sign with a unique identifier, such as the name of the site or a phrase created by Lux. In February of 2013, some users of the Empire voiced their opinion that they wanted something more extreme. They wanted more depravity, more violence, and Lux, well, he delivered. Hurt to the Core, a site dedicated to hardcore pornography. Hurt to the Core was the first of its kind on the Darknet, a forum dedicated to videos, images, and discussion about the rape, torture, and even murder of young children. At the height of its popularity, it garnered 400,000 views per day. Although Lux claimed he didn't necessarily like the content that was posted on Hurt to the Core, he believed that others did, and so he hosted it in the name of freedom of speech. Hurt to the Core was split into different sections. One of those sections had been split into different threads discussing different topics. By July of 2013, 23,000 posts were made talking about 2,192 different topics, which included how-to guides. Some of the most popular guides were as follows: kiddie porn for dummies, created by Lux; toddler child porn star, how you like to make them scream; sex tourism and prostitution, where to find them sexy little kids, and advice and guides on how to get what you want from kiddies. Some of the most popular general topic threads were as follows: 3 men and a baby, butchered bitches, young'uns bound, crying rape, need ideas for blackmailed girl aged 15, and bestiality. Out of all of the Empire, Lux was most active on Hurt to the Core, and he wasn't just making guides for members to use. No. He was giving out advice to some members about Hurtcore related topics, which does make you question if he actually was into the content that was being produced on the site. One member wanted advice about filming the abduction, rape, and murder of a 5-year-old girl in Russia. Okay, good. So, do you have a plan? And this is not just a fantasy for you. I have many contacts willing to purchase such a video. It was never confirmed if the Russian had gone through with the plan. An American user wanted advice about producing and distributing the abuse of a 7-year-old girl who suffered with muscular dystrophy and was a mute. I work in the medical field, and if you show me a picture of her wheelchair, I bet I could track you down in a week. It's too dangerous to distribute, as she's too recognizable. However, you should make it for your own gratification. At least you know she can't cry for help. The user would then ask Lux about releasing just the audio. If you record audio, then that can give a lot away, but it's good, the fact she can't speak. I don't think it's going to narrow it down. As word began to spread about Hurt to the Core, many law enforcement agencies and hacking groups had tried to gain access to the site. But as you could only gain access by referral, no one was able to enter. However, hackers had indeed managed to enter Hurt to the Core in December of 2013, according to reports coming out of Mexico. One topic that was pointed out was something the hackers discovered in a thread titled Child Sex and Prostitution. To sum up, a user from Mexico stated that children as young as infants could be delivered by human traffickers to any hotel or home in any city or state for the rental price of $4,000 and if they wanted to buy them, it would set them back $10,000. Speaking of his own experience, he stated he paid more than $30,000 to buy 3 children, 2 boys aged 2 and 6 years old and a 4-year-old girl, to sexually abuse them at a ranch he owned in Mexico, adding he had to pay extra because all 3 died as a result of the sexual abuse he put them through. With the information now in hand, the hackers would reach out to the Mexican National Security Council and the Mexican Federal Police to tell them that children were potentially being trafficked around various parts of Mexico, and that they should check in with various orphanages to see if children were indeed going missing after being adopted. On December 9th, 2013, Governor Fausto Figueredo announced that he, along with law enforcement agencies from across Mexico, had launched an investigation to dismantle an organized pedophile network that had been operating out of Morelia, a city in the state of Michoacan. This network was said to have been posting and exchanging photos of underage children on Hurt to the Core. The group had been exposed thanks to the work of the hackers. What's never been confirmed, though, is whether this group had in fact been abducting children and selling them on. As of September 2015, Mexican news outlets reported that no arrests came as the result of the operation. In early 2013, rumours began circulating on the Darknet about a video titled Daisy's Destruction. Depending on who was telling the story, it would vary in regards to the content, but one common theme was that it involved the torture of at least one young girl. Many claimed it would go a step further and contained the murder of said girl, with reports that some allegedly paid $10,000 to receive a copy. It looked as if this movie, Daisy's Destruction, if it even existed, wasn't going to be released anytime soon. Enters Lux. Lux set out on a mission to see if A, the video was real, and B, if it was real, could he secure a copy for himself to release on Hurt to the Core. He quickly discovered that Daisy's Destruction was in fact real, and the sources who told him it was real pointed Lux in the direction of an online user called Excitagirl, who claimed that they had a copy. Excitagirl would go on to explain that they were the owner of a company by the name of No Limits Fun, a hardcore production company that mainly focused on young Asian girls. The user, Excitagirl, would turn out to be a man by the name of Peter Scully. For those of you who aren't familiar with Peter Scully, back in 2011, he fled from his home country of Australia and headed to the Philippines after being involved in a property fraud scheme that fleeced more than $2.7 million from 20 different investors. After spending a while in the Philippines, Peter would acquire himself 2 Filipino girlfriends, Carme Ann Alvarez and Lizelle Margelo Castana, and together they would approach parents in impoverished neighborhoods with offers of education and food for their children. They would take the kids under their wing. What the parents weren't aware of, though, was that they were about to hand their children over to monsters. The trio would give the children a false sense of security when first arriving at a property rented out by Peter, for example by offering them something to eat. But the mask would eventually slip, and the children would be subjected to days, months, and even years of torture and rape. Some of these instances would go on to be caught on camera and sold on Peter's child pornography site, No Limits Fun. The most infamous of Scully's video collection? None other than Daisy's Destruction, a multi-part video series that featured the rape and torture of 3 girls, 11-year-old Cindy, 12-year-old Liza, and Daisy, just 18 months old. Only Liza and Daisy would go on to survive, although Daisy continues to suffer with life-changing injuries, both physically and mentally. That meant then that Cindy would die at the hands of her abusers. When investigators finally located her body some 3 years after she was murdered, they found her in a shallow grave beneath a house that Peter Scully had been renting. She'd been forced to dig her own grave and was then strangled to death. All of this was said to have been caught on camera according to authorities. However, it's unclear if the murder was a feature on Daisy's Destruction. With the video series going somewhat viral due to the nature of the content, it quickly landed in the hands of Dutch police, who determined that it was shot in the Philippines. They then handed their evidence over to local authorities, and a task force was opened to find the perpetrator. Although they understood a white Australian male was their key suspect, it was hard to pinpoint exactly who it was. As part of their operation in order to eliminate suspects, investigators went door to door for months to see if the interior of people's homes matched what was in Daisy's Destruction. Ultimately, law enforcement in the Philippines wouldn't be able to locate the house they were looking for, and all other leads they were investigating were dead ends. However, there'd be a break in the case just as it was going somewhat cold. Two of Peter's victims would come forward to police after recently escaping. Carme let them go after she had felt sorry for them. Over the course of 5 days, the two victims had been subjected to multiple rounds of rape and torture. They told police that they had attempted to escape within the first couple of days, but were caught in the process. And as punishment, Peter made the pair dig their own graves. Who knows? They could have been the next murder victims. Peter Scully was eventually tracked down by law enforcement after going on the run for months. When he was captured, he was charged with 75 offences that were split into 2 separate cases. The first covered Peter and Carme. They both faced 1 count of human trafficking and 5 counts of rape by sexual assault of underage girls. In 2018, the pair were found guilty on all charges that were put against them. They were both sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The second covered Peter and Lizelle. They both faced 69 counts of various offences ranging from murder to the production and distribution of child pornography on the dark web. In 2022, the pair were found guilty on all the charges that were placed against them. Peter was handed a 129-year prison sentence, Lizelle 126. Lux would open up negotiations with Peter Scully in order to purchase the full video of Daisy's destruction, offering him $900 in Bitcoin. That was swiftly rejected. I could sell this for up to $10,000 through private networks. However, I could create more custom videos for Hurt to the Core if we enter a long-term business relationship. But as Lux's business model wasn't based on monetary gain, rather content for content, negotiations broke down. Lux simply couldn't afford to pay for the video, and so the two went their separate ways. Eventually, Lux managed to secure himself 4 short extracts of Daisy's destruction, a total of 12 minutes worth of footage from other sources. All were released on Hurt to the Core at once, free to all members as revenge for the deal falling through. Those NLF guys deserved me leaking Daisy's destruction. They were whiny bitches. With Daisy's destruction now out in the open, Lux had pushed the boundaries. He felt untouchable. So much in fact, he had this message for law enforcement when they eventually shut down Freedom Hosting. Well, it looks like this empire hasn't fallen yet. To any law enforcement agency whom may be reading this, fuck you. You cannot keep us down. And every time you try, we'll just get bigger and bigger. So thanks for the publicity and leading more paedophiles to where you can't catch them. To my fellow pedos, it won't be long now until all of the major CP sites are back up and running. In the meantime, I suggest you spend your newfound free time by going out and fucking some kiddies. Although Lux had felt untouchable for a while, for some reason in June of 2014, he got spooked and felt law enforcement were closing in. So he made the decision to send an email to the FBI's cyber tip line offering up details about his users. My name is Lux, and not only do I run the largest online suite of child pornography websites on tour, but I also have knowledge about its users and their identities, unrivaled by anyone out there. I'm willing to hand over control of my empire, including administration details for all sites under the pedo empire, and server details, as well as access to my emails. On top of that, I also have complete control over the large group of proven producers on any site. I'm sure that access to this, let alone everything else I'm offering you, is merit for the conditions I will outline below. The conditions include $50,000 in Bitcoin and immunity across all jurisdictions. To no surprise, the FBI didn't budge. They weren't interested in giving in to either demand. It's clear you're not taking my offer seriously. It's not a game. These are real lives you're bargaining on. It's now clear that if I want to fix this problem, I need to do it myself. I will get rid of these people because no one else will. As you don't want to be a part of the solution, I bid you farewell. After contact was made with the FBI, Lux announced to his inner circle that he would be closing down Pedo Empire. When the word spread, some reports say that sickos reacted by posting child abuse images online in his honor. On June 24th, 2014, true to his word, Lux closed Pedo Empire. As always, all empires eventually fall, and today is the day that it falls. After years of running CP hidden services, today is the day that I walk away. There are personal issues which my close friends have been made aware of that have forced me to make this decision. I don't like awkward farewells, so goodbye. Regards, Lux. If you try to look online for a reason as to why Lux abruptly closed Pedo Empire, you're normally met with two answers. The first is a report claiming that he closed it due to, quote, personal issues, like he stated in his goodbye note. Those personal issues were later revealed as a suspected brain tumour. The other is there is no answer. It states for some reason he closed it. It doesn't go any further than that. But when you connect the dots, a potential answer is there, and it's far from a brain tumour. It's actually connected to another Darknet user by the name of Skee. Skee, aka Shannon McCool, was a prolific paedophile and owner of the Love Zone, a darknet child abuse site which we've spoke about earlier on in this video. It had been home to over 50,000 members, including the likes of Richard Huckle. If you wanted to become a member, you were required to upload hardcore child exploitation material as a rite of initiation. By 2014, the site had surpassed Lolita City as the biggest child abuse site on the darknet. If you've seen my video covering Richard Huckle, then you'll know that Task Force Argos, a branch of the Queensland Police in Australia tackling online child abusers, brought the Love Zone down along with Shannon and a few higher-ups on the site in 2014. Their investigation into the Love Zone began as the result of an operation carried out by Canadian police back in 2010. Initially, it didn't involve Australian authorities. Dubbed Project Spade, law enforcement in Toronto, Canada, were looking into a man known as Brian Way, a 42-year-old who had a production crew in different countries across Eastern Europe. They had been filming what's called naturist videos of children, in other words, autistic films that featured nude boys aged between 5 and 12 years old. There was a loophole though, as they weren't of a, quote, sexual nature, the police couldn't actually do anything about it. An investigation would be opened into Brian back in the early 2000s after police received complaint about the films his production crew were making, but as you know, police couldn't do anything about it, so no charges were ever brought forward. The movies would go on to be sold around the globe through Brian's website, asoffilms.com. The business went on to make millions. Customers would use their credit cards to make purchases. At the height of its popularity, over 2 million people visited the site. In 2010, police investigated Brian once again, although initially he wouldn't be a specific target. You see, police had begun to investigate a person who was sharing extreme child pornography images online, and when that person was identified, it was none other than Brian Way. Not only was he sharing extreme child pornography images online with other pedophiles, police soon discovered that some of his movies wouldn't be classed as legal artistic films either, rather child pornography. In May of 2011, police raided Brian's warehouse. Up to 45 terabytes of child exploitation material that had been produced by Azov Films over the span of nearly a decade had been present. To put that into perspective, it took tens of police officers 4 full days, yes, that's 24-hour days, to remove the content from the warehouse. Brian would be charged and subsequently found guilty on 15 counts of possessing, publishing and selling videos of naked, prepubescent and pubescent boys and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, that sentence would be cut to just 7 years and 10 months after he told the appeal judge that he was being abused in jail. When the secret operation was announced to the public on November 14th, 2013, it was clear that this wasn't just a Canadian operation, rather a worldwide one. Canadian police managed to track down 328 customers from around the world, and so once they were identified, they passed the information on to their international counterparts.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to talk about Project Spade this morning. In October 2010, undercover online officers with the Child Exploitation section of the Toronto Police Service made contact with a male on the internet who was sharing very graphic images of young children being sexually abused. Through investigations, the officers were able to trace the internet connection to a male living in Toronto. The investigation revealed that this individual was running an exploitation movie, production, and distribution company from an address within the city of Toronto. This company operated a website known as www.azoffilms.com, where customers from around the world could place orders to have movies sent to them through the mail or through the internet. Investigators believe many of these movies were consistent with the Canadian Criminal Code definition of child pornography. At this time, the Toronto Police Service sought the assistance of the United States Postal Inspection Service, as it appeared many of the movies were being exported into the United States. The Toronto Police Service and the United States Postal Inspection Service then began a joint investigation. On May 1st, 2011, after a 7-month-long investigation, officers executed numerous search warrants at various locations across the city of Toronto. One of these search warrants was executed at the site of the purported business located in the West End of Toronto. Officers spent 4 days inside this business, cataloging the thousands of movies, computers, and other media located during their search. At this time, over 45 terabytes of information was seized from the business. And to give you some perspective, this is equivalent to a stack of paper as tall as 1,500 CN Towers. On the same date, a search warrant was also executed at the residence of the owner-operator of the business, Mr. Brian Way. It is alleged that officers located hundreds of thousands of images and videos detailing horrific sexual acts against very young children, some of the worst that they have ever viewed. Brian Way, 42 years of age, has been charged with a total of 24 offenses, including numerous child pornography, proceeds of crime offenses, and instructing a criminal organization. We believe this is the first time in Canada that anyone has been charged with being a part of a criminal organization in regards to child pornography. It is alleged that Mr. Way's company had revenues in excess of $4 million during the years he was operating. It is also alleged that Mr. Way paid people to have children filmed in Eastern European countries in order to produce some of the movies that he would sell online. These producers of the child exploitation movies, which were sold exclusively through Azov Films, have all been convicted in their respective countries. With the assistance of the Toronto Police Service's technological tech section, officers were able to recreate the customer database used by Azov Films to distribute the material around the world. Child exploitation officers, with the assistance from the members of the Ontario Provincial Strategy to Protect Children from Sexual Abuse and Exploitation on the Internet, then spent months analyzing all the seized material, determining who the customers were. Information was then sent through the RCMP's National Child Exploitation Coordination Center and Interpol to over 50 countries. This investigation was dubbed Project Spade, and its success has been extraordinary. To date, the project as a whole has saved 386 children from sexual abuse worldwide. This alone is spectacular. Furthermore, as of this morning, the number has actually gone up. Sweden contacted us and advised us that they arrested 7 more people for this project. So 348 individuals have been arrested worldwide as part of the investigation. They include 50 in Ontario, 58 in the rest of Canada, 76 in the United States, and 164 internationally. Of concern to the investigators was the number of people that had close contact with children. The arrests included 40 school teachers, 9 doctors and nurses, 32 people who volunteered with children, 6 law enforcement personnel, 9 pastors or priests, and 3 foster parents. An example of one of the search warrants that was conducted in Canada, a search warrant was executed at a retired school teacher's residence. He had over 350,000 images and over 9,000 videos of child sexual abuse. Some of these images were of children known to him, and he was also charged with sexually abusing a young child relative. We worked with several international law enforcement agencies during this project: Australian Federal Police, who are here today, Spanish National Police, here today, Special Investigations Unit for the Investigation of Trafficking in Mexico, also here today, Queensland Police Service, Task Force Argos, South African Police Service, Hong Kong Police Service, Norwegian Police Service, Garda, Ireland Police Service, National Police Force of Greece, and Royal Gibraltar Police. The success of this joint project with the United States Postal Inspection Service, along with all our international partners and other agencies you see here today, confirms that when we work together, regardless of the borders that divide us, we can successfully track down those who not only prey on our most vulnerable, but also profit from it. I would like to thank everyone involved and commend them for their hard work and commitment to this project. I would also like to acknowledge cybertip.ca, who is also present with us today. Cybertip.ca .ca is Canada's tip line to report the online sexual exploitation of children. They received numerous tips regarding Mr. Way's website and forwarded them to us, assisting us in detecting his website. Thank you.
So this is where Task Force Argos comes into play. When they got intel that some Australians had been purchasing child exploitation movies from Brian Way, they set out on making multiple arrests. There was one arrest in particular though that would open a Pandora's box. When Task Force Argos arrested this particular person who's been named as Mr. Smith and seized his computer, they noticed that he encrypted certain parts of it. However, he made the thankful mistake of leaving all of his dark web login details on an unencrypted note. The login details would lead police down a Darknet rabbit hole and ultimately led them to the Love Zone. It was uncharted territory. Mr. Smith was a VIP member, meaning he had been uploading at least 4 gigabytes of preteen hardcore child abuse content to the site every 30 days. He had to keep this up, or he would have his VIP status stripped from him. When police got into the Love Zone, they realised they only had a few weeks at best to stay on the site. So Task Force Argos had to approach a judge in order to get approved for something that's called a controlled operation. In other words, they were asking the judge for the go-ahead to legally be allowed to possess and distribute child exploitation material in order to stay on the website. The bigger picture was to bring down as many predators as they could. The judge would approve the operation, and it proved successful. In a nutshell, the operation consisted of police uploading content in order to keep their VIP status, meaning they could keep an eye on everyone, including the owner, Skee. Even though a covert operation was underway, it would be good old-fashioned detective work that would finally unmask Skee. You see, police noticed a pattern in the way Skee greeted the users in the VIP section of the Love Zone. He used the phrase hires, and although the general consensus is that this phrase is used by females, police knew they were dealing with a man because Skee was actively producing fresh child abuse material. He would be raping different children, 7 to be exact. They also knew that Skee was an Australian because he made victims hold a piece of paper with the word Aussie written on it while they were being raped. Police had to act quick, and so Task Force Argos team member Paul Griffiths, a victim identification specialist, punched in the phrase hires on Google. 450,000 results were returned, but to Paul's surprise, within the first few pages, the phrase hires had been used by a man on an Australian forum board about trucks. He was asking for advice about raising the suspension to his VW utility, and had made the mistake of leaving his license plate bare. When police searched the license plate up, it was registered to a man by the name of Shannon McCool. Police were now confident enough that they had finally caught Skee. So they made their move. And to no surprise, they captured the right man.
Good morning, everyone. David Waterford from Families SA, and I will brief you about an alleged offender who appeared before the Adelaide Magistrates Court on the 10th of June this year, and he remains in custody today. This offender was employed within Families SA in a role caring for young children at the time of this offending. You will appreciate that the information we can provide you is limited because of the ongoing police investigation that is being conducted into this serious criminal offence. I remind everyone that there is a court suppression order in place, as well as the usual operation of the Evidence Act, which prohibits the publication of certain information in proceedings for a sexual offence. On the 6th of June this year, Special Crimes Investigation Branch investigators received information concerning the dissemination of child exploitation material. Due to the serious nature of that information provided at this time, investigators searched the domestic premises in the metropolitan area of Adelaide on the 9th of June. As a direct result of that search, investigators arrested a male adult who is charged with 7 counts of unlawful sexual intercourse with young children in his care. He is also charged with the production, possession and dissemination of child exploitation material. At the time of entering the premises, police were not aware of any contact offending between the alleged offender and the child victims. The focus of the investigation up until that time related to the possession and dissemination of child exploitation material. At the time of the arrest, police became aware of alleged contact offending between the alleged offender and the children. This evidence led to 7 charges of unlawful sexual intercourse. When these 7 charges were laid on the 10th of June, investigators were not aware of the identities of the 7 victims. We were not aware of the location of the offences, nor were we aware of the time frame of that offending. Since that time, specialist sex crime investigators have been working closely with our computer specialists in an attempt to identify the young victims. This analysis has been tireless and has involved the examination of over 100,000 still photographs and 600 video files containing child exploitation material. This part of the investigation is not complete, and it still has a long way to go before it can be completed. Late on Wednesday of last week, with the assistance of Families SA, the investigators identified 7 victims. The victim identification process has been slow and very tedious, as it has involved comparing the images of the child victims contained within the child exploitation material against documentary material provided to us by Families SA. This process has been made even more problematic as some of the child exploitation images were partial images only. Since the alleged offender's arrest, the focus of this investigation has been the identification of the victims, and that remains today. It is important to identify the victims so that appropriate counselling and medical support can be provided to these victims, their parents or guardians. Investigators and Families SA are now in the process of informing the parents of the 7 children of the circumstances of the alleged offences and the identity of the alleged offender. Full support from police, Families SA and the Child Protection Services will be provided to the parents and guardians of these children. This investigation has been a priority for the police and will remain a priority. We still have a significant amount of computer analysis to be conducted with the clear objective to identify all victims of this abuse. This investigation is being led by SAPOL and will continue until we have identified all possible offences and the identity of any further possible victims. Due to the complexity and the enormity of the data to be analysed, this investigation may take many months before it is completed. But rest assured, our investigation will remain victim-focused. This investigation can be best described as being horrific. It is horrific for the young victims and their families, and it is deeply disturbing for the police who are required to view these images. I now pass on to David.
Shannon McCool had been a government-approved social care worker looking after vulnerable children, some who had previously been sexually abused. Many complaints had been made about him in the past about his inappropriate behaviour towards children, but ultimately those complaints were swept under the rug. For 3 years he went on to sexually abuse 7 children while he was taking care of them as a government-approved social care worker. One of the victims had been a young disabled boy, and another an 18-month-old toddler. All are thought to have been under the age of 12.
Good evening. Victims have cheered in court as Families SA carer Shannon McCool was jailed for 3 decades for inflicting vile sexual abuse on already troubled children. McCool, who was also the kingpin of a global child porn network, was described by the judge as a worldwide evil like he'd never seen before.
Shannon McCool needs protection from other inmates in jail, but the children he abused were denied that right under his care. Instead, he stole their innocence in the most sickening of ways, and he'll now pay with the next 35 years of his life.
I've got no remorse for him at all. I hope that he gets what he deserves.
McCall cried as Judge Paul Rice described in harrowing detail the repulsive crimes inflicted on 7 children. The former family's SA carer was trusted to look after them in a government-run residential facility. But when one of the state's heaviest sentences was imposed on him, the courtroom erupted into applause.
It's over in one part of it's over, and now I can deal with our family trauma.
McCall's victims were as young as 18 months. Some were disabled, all were vulnerable.
It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting.
McCall uploaded hundreds of thousands of videos and images to his depraved website, which fed an international market of more than 1,000 pedophiles. As website CEO, McCall boasted and encouraged others to post their own sickening material.
It was horrible to hear. I can't understand how anyone can act that way.
Nor could Judge Rice. In fact, he struggled with the gravity of McCall's insidious behaviour, saying no case has ever come close. Yours is a worldwide evil well beyond my judicial experience. Some people may describe your crimes as sick, but I prefer evil and depraved. You have no moral compass.
It's been emotional the whole time, but this time it was just, wow.
33-year-old McCall will be 61 before he has any chance of parole. The judge doubtful the pedophile can ever change his ways. What is plain is that the impact on these children is not in the past. It is immediate, ongoing and unfolding as they grow up.
And I'm hoping that my grandson will never lay eyes on him again.
With Skee now in police custody, it was time for Task Force Argos to take over the Love Zone and bring down other members. One of those, none other than Lux. Exactly 2 weeks after Shannon McCall had been arrested, Lux would go on to announce that he was closing his pedo empire down. Somewhere along the line, did Lux and Skee have a secret code that would pull the plug on everything if either suspected that police had overtaken their accounts? For example, if Lux said a certain phrase to Skee, Skee would have to give a certain answer. Or maybe Lux just had a hunch that something was off and decided to delete every trace of his online activity. It wouldn't be too hard to suggest either one was true, because reports say that many higher-ups within the Love Zone noticed that Skee, now operated by law enforcement, had started to speak and act differently. None of that would matter though, because what Lux didn't realise was that even though he had ended his pedo empire, the police had connected it to his home address. Little is known about the operation and how law enforcement managed to make the connection. All we know is that it was discovered after they had taken over the Love Zone. August 26th, 2014. Police are about to swoop on a house in Melbourne, Australia. They were about to come face to face with the most hated man on the Darknet. To the police's understanding, the property was owned by a white working class male in his 50s, a mechanic who lived there with his wife, son and daughter. They thought for sure that he was Lux. But as police began to tear the house apart, looking for the computer that hosted one of the most disgusting sites on the dark web, they instantly knew it wasn't the father, because he had no idea of how to even operate a computer. Their focus soon turned to the son, Matthew David Graham. 22-year-old Matthew David Graham, a nanotech student with no social life, liked to spend his days indoors playing games such as World of Warcraft. That was his form of social interaction. In his life away from a computer screen, he seemed like an average university student. However, as you know, he was hiding a dark secret. At the age of 18, he began exploring child exploitation websites on the dark web. Over the span of roughly 3 years, he created the most horrific child abuse websites at his parents' home. They were none the wiser. When police raided Matthew's house on that morning in August of 2014, detectives asked him to unlock his laptop and PC, but he refused. However, he would hand over his phone and passcode for it. An initial search of the phone brought up nothing, but 3 hardcore-related images would emerge emerge after detectives took a deep dive into the device's cache. As the result of this find, Matthew would initially be arrested and charged for possessing child abuse material and failing to hand over his passcodes. No further charges were added at that time though, because police had no evidence. All they had was the lead that led to the address. Matthew's PC and laptop would be shipped off to Europol in Germany and the FBI in America to see if they could get into them. They already knew Matthew Graham was Lux, but they needed the data from the devices as they had stored the evidence they needed. For a while, both struggled, but eventually the FBI would find their way inside, and there was the evidence they were searching for. Australian detectives would go on to give Matthew two options upon discovery of the findings. Either A, plead guilty in Australia and hand over the passcode to the other device, or B, face a potential extradition to America where he had been facing separate charges. He settled for the former. I guess I wanted to be part of something, and so I made it up. The sexualization was never anything I was interested in, it was the power within the paedophile community. On the 30th of July 2015, just under a year after his arrest, Matthew was charged with 88 offences, which covered a wide range of crimes, but by the time he was sentenced in March of 2016, he was only sentenced for 13 of the original 88, after he struck up a deal with the prosecution. Those 13 charges included crimes such as hosting and distributing child exploitation material, encouraging the kidnap, rape and murder of the 5-year-old Russian girl, and encouraging the rape of the 7-year-old disabled girl in America. During Matthew's sentencing hearing, the judge presiding over the case was extremely hesitant about viewing some of the material that was hosted on Hurt to the Core, but the prosecution advised that the judge needed to watch at least small clips of Daisy's destruction without audio to get an idea of the horrific content that Matthew had allowed on the site. That way, it would help the judge with what sentence to hand down. The judge agreed. How any human can view that impassively, the infant was being tortured, actual physical torture, an extremely trusting, vulnerable child who begins smiling, wearing a nappy, and ends a wailing physical wreck. I've seen some shocking things over the journey of my career, and I've never seen anything like that. After the viewing, the judge was said to have appeared pale and looked disorientated. On the 17th of March 2016, Matthew David Graham was handed a 15.5-year prison sentence with the minimum term of 10 years.
He was considered the worst administrator of some of the worst websites in the world at the time. So we knew who the user was, we just had to make the connection to that Lux was Matthew Graham. When I first saw him on the day that we served the warrant, I was surprised by his confidence, that he was quite calm in that environment. In his mind, I can't imagine how that would have been going, him thinking, have they got me? Because obviously there's a bit of bluff. What we've got, what we don't have, not all our cards are played at the time. The level of and the type of content that he was dealing with was considered the worst in the world by FBI, by Europol. It was hardcore, hurtcore material. So torture and abuse of babies, mainly through to I think about 12. He was surprising. When it got to the interview, how candid and open he was to talk about that level of depravity, that it didn't flinch, it just rolled off his tongue what he was talking about. It was staggering to think that the FBI and Europol are all chasing Lux. Who is he? Where is he? And lo and behold, he's here. And he's a 21-year-old.
Lux in some ways stands out and in some ways just like the other Darknet pedophiles that I spoke to. A lot of people I know ask, why would someone like this speak to a member of the media? And I think that one of the ways that he's just like the other people in this community is that he needs someone to speak to. He's still a human being, and this is a secret that they keep. And they saw me as someone who they could safely speak to. And so you could get that sense from him the same way you could get that sense from the other pedophiles in the Darknet. He was different, I think, in that he was singularly hated by other pedophiles. I hadn't met too many other people who even like entire communities of other pedophiles really despised. Lux was hated in the pedophile community because he promoted hurtcore, which is a genre within a genre, right? It's a genre of child pornography in which the idea is that the kid is getting hurt and hit and abused beyond the normal level of abuse of child pornography. And that is something that a not insignificant amount of people enjoy, but that even more other pedophiles hate. It's funny to call them that, but the mainstream pedophiles basically think of this as abhorrent because as part of the justification of their actions, they see themselves as part of child love. They see themselves as doing what's right for the child, what the child wants. And while that requires its own twisted sense of justification, it's another twist to say that the kid wants to be hit. There is no twist. The people who enjoy hurtcore, for the most part, get off on the fact that the kids are not enjoying it, and that is, to even most pedophiles, really abhorrent.
First off, I fully accept this offer may not be for everyone, so feel free to say no, but my offer is as follows. I would be interested in requesting photographs from you of yourself, either topless or in the nude. In exchange for this, I would be willing to pay between £300 to £800. As a bit of a background, i.e. why is this perv asking me for these pictures, I certainly wouldn't go as far as to call myself an artist, but I love to draw, mostly in charcoal, and the images I would ask you to produce would be the sort of thing that most inspires me. Absolutely nobody besides myself would ever see them. Let me know if this is something of interest for you. Thank you for taking your time to read this. Was an email sent out by a person called Liz to various people who listed services such as babysitting and dog walking on Gumtree, a classified ads website. The people who listed were looking to earn a bit of cash on the side. A lot of the time it had been children in their early teens. So when the offer of quick money was there to help someone with an art piece, they jumped at the offer. What they didn't know though was that once those images were sent, they'd be sucked into a blackmail scheme. If they didn't continue to send images that got more degrading as time went on, Liz would threaten to leak what material they had to people who knew of the victim. Whoever this Liz character was, did their due diligence in order to keep the blackmail scheme going. After targeting quite literally tens of children throughout 2012 and 2013, it was no surprise that police were fully aware of who Liz was. But the police had no way of figuring out Liz's true identity because Liz had used different means to hide any leads going back to them. In other words, they were a ghost. However, it wouldn't be too long before detectives in the United Kingdom connected Liz to a darknet site by the name of Hurt to the Core. Let's rewind. Earlier on in the video, we were discussing Hurt to the Core and some of the popular threads it contained. One of those was titled, "Need Ideas for Blackmailed Girl, Aged 15. The FBI would figure out that the person behind the thread, InTheGarden, had been from the UK, and so they alerted their UK counterparts, the National Crime Agency, to give them a heads up about the discovery. Some point after this notification, a 15-year-old girl who fell victim to Liz's Gumtree blackmail scheme came forward to police, and after doing a cross-reference in the database, it was clear to detectives that the girl who had just came forward was the 15-year-old girl referenced in the thread on Hurt to the Core. The National Crime Agency had made the connection. InTheGarden and Liz were the same person. The hunt was on. Well, not exactly. I basically had a needle in a haystack. There are 32 million UK males over the age of 18, so I had to reduce that down to 1. It took 4 years for the National Crime Agency, working in collaboration with the GCHQ, the UK spy agency, the FBI, the US Department of Homeland Security, the Australian Federal Police, the New Zealand Police, and the Israel Police to finally figure out who InTheGarden was. They were a #1 target. Over that 4-year period, Liz, going under different names, had continued their blackmail scheme on the surface web. And when they received images and videos, typically child pornography, from a victim, they posted that content on Hurt to the Core. InTheGarden had posted that often, they earned the title child rapist. That meant then that at a minimum, they posted 250 separate posts of hurtcore images and videos relating to children before the site closed in 2014. After that, it's believed their offending continued elsewhere on the Darknet, this time under the aliases Evil Mind and 666 Devil. Although reports don't state what websites they posted to, more than likely due to ongoing police investigations. It's thought that InTheGarden approached up to 300 people as a part of their blackmail scheme. Hundreds would go on to fall victim. But in 2017, it would all come to an end. In March of that year, police had managed to trace the InTheGarden, Evil Mind, and 666 Devil accounts to an address in Birmingham, England. However, detectives weren't too sure how strong the lead was because the person of interest didn't fit the profile of someone who typically posted such content on the Darknet. They had to go undercover. That's 29-year-old University of Birmingham lecturer Dr. Matthew Falder being surveilled by the National Crime Agency. He was their key suspect behind the Darknet accounts. But police say if you took a look at his life, you wouldn't have suspected that to be the case. He didn't necessarily fit the profile. Born in Knutsfield, Cheshire, Matthew Falder had grew up in a £700,000 home with a stable family life. There were no reports of any abuse. He attended private school throughout his childhood. His parents rubbed shoulders with the movers and shakers. Without sounding like too much of a cliche, Matthew had the opportunity to do whatever he wanted because the financial freedom was there. He decided to settle for his education and excelled in school. He's featured here in a school letter stating that out of 75,000 students nationwide, he was one of the 4% that, quote, struck gold in a maths competition. As part of beating that challenge, it granted him a place at the Maths Olympic Trials. He didn't feature on the school letter just once though, ladies and gentlemen, rather twice. On the next page, he was pictured with 6 other students who had completed interviews with the university of their choice and had all been accepted. Matthew chose to study natural sciences at the illustrious Cambridge University. He graduated with a master's degree. He was one of the finest students I'd ever supervised. His work had an international impact. Matthew revelled in the social side of university. He looked to impress his peers. He wasn't going to be that person who stayed inside all day studying. He wanted to be the life and soul of the party. What many didn't know though was that behind the smiles and laughter lay a dark secret. That's Matthew Falder. As early as 2007, he'd been setting up hidden cameras in bathrooms at publicly accessible toilets and his parents' home, covertly recording females he both knew and didn't. In total, 27 videos were taken of 8 victims over the period of a few years. This footage would initially be for personal use, but soon made its way onto the Darknet in roughly 2009 when Matthew connected with like-minded individuals. Not much is known about his early days on the Darknet, other than he would trade that footage in return for different depraved material. Nearly a decade on, police had connected him to online accounts that posted some of the most horrific child abuse videos. When that connection was eventually made in 2017, a 2-month surveillance operation was set up by the National Crime Agency, and by June of that year, they had more than enough evidence to suggest that he had been running the Darknet accounts.
What was it I've done? Oh, what was it I'm supposed to have done? So,
the offences that I've arrested you on suspicion of being involved in were blackmail, causing or inciting a child to engage in sexual activity, possessing indecent images of children.
Sounds like the rap sheet from hell.
Distributing indecent images of children, and causing GBH injuries to a person.
And it's become apparent that obviously that's an email account that's current and you're using at this moment in time. Is that correct?
No comment.
Is there any other email accounts, Matthew, that you're using at the current time?
No comment.
If there are any more email accounts, what are the passwords for them?
No comment.
Have you done that?
No comment.
Have you sent pictures of your blackmail victims to the parents?
No comment.
Of the victim, the grandparents?
No comment.
The workplace?
No comment.
The schools?
No comment.
The images that he provided to you, have you shared them with anybody else?
No comment.
Have you distributed those images to any like-minded individuals on the forums we've discussed previously?
No comment.
Or with any other person?
No comment.
Did you get any sexual gratification of that?
No
from
comment.
that? Or was it a power and control thing, Matthew?
No comment.
Or was it humiliation?
No comment.
You go on to say, and so you know, I know I'm 100% anonymous. How's that, Matthew?
No comment.
Initially, Matthew gave a no-comment interview to police, but on the third day of his arrest, in a prepared statement, he would go on to say that he owned the Evil Mind account, but that admission also meant he was the owner of InTheGarden and 666 Devil. Matthew Falder would go on to be charged with 188 separate offences for crimes ranging from encouraging the rape of a minor to owning a paedophile manual which instructed paedophiles on how to carry out child sexual abuse and not be detected by police. He would go on to plead guilty to 137 out of the 188 charges that were placed against him. The rest are to lie on his file. On February 19th, 2018, Matthew Falder would be handed a 32-year prison sentence, but believe it or not, just 8 months later, that sentence was reduced to 25 years after an appeal hearing. He's to serve 2/3 of that sentence before he's eligible for parole.
Like, people wouldn't understand that it wasn't my fault how it started and that I didn't want to do it, but I felt that no one would understand because there was no one there sort of holding a knife to me saying, you will do this, even though it felt like that. So I didn't tell anyone. I was ashamed of what I'd done. I don't talk to my family anymore. I felt like they wouldn't understand and didn't understand what had happened to me. I've got my day in court and I want everyone else to have that day. I want them to tell someone, to tell a friend, tell your parents, tell someone at work. And to tell the police, because they can, even if it takes a long time, find these people, and they will. They will get punished.
So it's very difficult to understand a crime where the motive does not include sex, passion, money, or revenge or hate. When the sole motivation of an individual is purely to cause pain to another, that's quite hard to grasp. Most crimes, you can see the motive. You cannot accept the motive, but you can see where it comes from. But in this individual, the sole motivation was to inflict pain on another, and the journey to that. So it was all about the complete and total power and control over another person. When we identified Matthew Falder, there was a real adrenaline rush. The problem is, we have to make sure that, or I have to make sure that at the point at which I decide to take action, that A, I'm not putting anybody at risk. So the point you identify, is anybody at risk currently? Have I got enough to do that intervention? And have I got enough that when I do that intervention, I am going to stop his capability to commit further crimes?
Some of the people affected by Dr. Falder's behaviour, that impact for some has been lifelong, and for many of them, we've been able to offer them options of help and support to start to move forward with hopefully a different chapter in their life, and being able to safeguard them through the work that the organisation has done as part of the investigation has just been really rewarding and really key. We didn't know who he was or where he was, so in terms of working over quite a prolonged period of time, knowing that there was likely harm that he was causing to people, that we weren't able to intervene and stop and protect, there were times when that was really challenging.
Matthew Falder thought he wouldn't be caught. And I think he actually was probably the type of individual that would be telling people that he wouldn't be caught on the anonymous service and then living a completely different life in his day-to-day life. Ultimately, that wasn't the case. Ultimately, we, with our international partners, caught him, and with the help of the victims, we've put him in prison. So for us, this has been a relentless pursuit to catch Dr. Matthew Falder. But what has saddened me is his relentless pursuit of the victims, and he would stop at nothing to exploit them, to make them feel sad, humiliated or unhappy. And he didn't really care in any way, shape or form how that manifested. Ultimately, that has devastated some people's lives, and I'm very proud of our team and also those victims for being able to stand up and stop him. So for me, the highs of this investigation are actually catching him and actually knowing that it stopped, because like when I sat in court behind some of the victims, I felt truly proud of them, and I felt the journey that they've been on, we've actually been able to help them to end it. In terms of the lows, there's been moments when I've been driving home thinking, is this going to end? How are we actually going to deal with this? And ultimately, you know, as a human being, that can be really tricky because you can see the abuse that's happening and you sometimes feel powerless to stop it. Ultimately, the high is that end point when it stopped. So Matthew Falder is not alone in exploiting, grooming and blackmailing people. There's many other people out there who are doing that. However, Matthew Falder is part of a very small group of people that took it to an extreme where it was about absolute exploitation, about absolute pain, and about really the degradation of humans within society. So thankfully he is quite rare, but there are others, and our job as the NCA is to catch them. Anonymous networks, by their very definition in nature, are really, really tricky, because what you've effectively got is a place where people can go, they can hide, and they can't be found. So of course what that means, you've got to be innovative, you've got to use new and different tactics, and ultimately you've got to think around a very difficult problem. I'm really, really proud of the staff, and I think when you sometimes sit back and look at them working those long hours and actually missing those home appointments, and also just sometimes having to deal with really depraved and disgusting material, I just think they're brilliant, and the sacrifices they've made for justice is truly impressive.
The large-scale offending, the most important aspects as a prosecutor that you have to deal with is to ensure that the court is given the accurate picture of the level of the person's offending and the scale of the offending. It was important to represent in the charges, however many, the nature of the different types of offences that Mr. Falder had committed, and it was important to represent every single victim that had been identified and for whom there was sufficient evidence.
IRS Criminal Investigation Special Agents Chris Jong-Woo and Tigran Gambaran are sitting in Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi airport, ready to jet back home to Washington, D.C. after the successful arrest of Alexandra Casas, owner of the Alpha Bay, a darknet drugs marketplace that had grown 10 times as big as its predecessor, the Silk Road. Although successful, Chris and Tigran had been sidelined by their law enforcement counterparts in the FBI when it came to the arrest itself, an anticlimactic ending for a case they'd been working tirelessly on for years at that point. In fact, they hadn't even been invited to watch a live stream of the arrest, they just got word when the job was done. Their flights were delayed on that summer's evening in July of 2017, so to pass time, they sat down together to figure out what their next case should be, with the help of a blockchain tracing software by the name of Chainalysis. The software was responsible for aiding in many darknet-related cases. A darknet gambling site was one lead they wanted to follow, but that would have been a tiny headline hidden within 1,000 news articles. They needed something bigger. Darknet drug markets practically ceased to exist for months after the takedown of the Alpha Bay. How are they going to match something of that magnitude? Welcome to video. I've been with the guys down at the National Crime Agency in London. They showed me a couple of their open cases. I think you might want to take a look into this one. They recently arrested a guy, I think his name was Matthew something. Anyway, he'd been caught up posting some extreme child exploitation material on the darknet. They managed to gain access to his computer and came across a website called Welcome to Video. According to the National Crime Agency, it's the biggest child exploitation website that they've ever came across, home to 1.3 million users. Now before you go asking me what this would have to do with the IRS, would you believe that users are using Bitcoin to pay for the material? We ran a Bitcoin address that was a part of Welcome to Video's financial network through Chainalysis, and there it was right in front of us. The addresses of customers who are paying to gain access to the material on the site. Honestly, I can't believe that so many people, not just buyers but also the site's administrator, have done nothing to obscure their crypto trail. Some users have literally purchased Bitcoin from an exchange and sent it straight to Welcome to Video. We've struck gold here. Look, why don't the IRS take the case on? It'll make headlines around the world, and the trail is there to follow. Chainalysis has taken the first step. The crypto from the site is being cashed out in South Korea, so I'd start there if you're going to take the case on. With the groundbreaking case now in their hands, both Chris and Tigran pulled a team together to investigate Welcome to Video, alongside law enforcement agencies from around the world. The IRS were going to treat this as a financial investigation rather than a child exploitation one. Even though that was the case, they would still have to force themselves to watch the material on the site in order to come to terms with what they were dealing with. Past the greeting page, the site displayed a vast, seemingly endless collection of video titles and thumbnails, arrayed in squares of 4 stills per video, apparently chosen automatically from the file's frames. Those small images were a catalogue of horrors, scene after scene of children being sexually abused and raped. Below the search field, it listed popular keywords users had entered. The most popular was an abbreviation for 1-year-old. The second most popular was an abbreviation for 2-year-old. Welcome to Video was home to 250,000 child abuse videos. The site was based on a point system. The points were used in order to gain access to the content. You could obtain points by either buying them with Bitcoin or by uploading content. The more downloads your video would get, the more points you'd receive. The website was encouraging the active abuse of children. It was time for the team to really get their heads down and capture as many people connected with the site as they could, hopefully saving children in the process. During the investigation, the team noticed that there was no option for users, including moderators, to pull crypto out, which meant all of the money flowing out of the site via crypto exchanges in South Korea, more than $300,000 worth of Bitcoin at that point, would almost certainly belong to the site's owner. So Tigran reached out to South Korean crypto exchanges Bithumb and CoinOne, whilst Chris reached out to an unidentified US crypto exchange to see who exactly was running Welcome to Video, all thanks to Chainalysis. However, there was a slight hurdle. Exchanges couldn't just give users information out, and so the team had to get court orders. In the background then, they continued to investigate the site itself, looking for any more clues. You're not going to believe what happened. As a basic security check, Tigran right-clicked on Welcome to Video's homepage and chose View Page Source. After doing so, he spotted an IP address and did some checks on it. To his surprise, it hadn't been obscured by Tor's anonymizing network, which meant he was staring at the unprotected address of Welcome to Video's server. That server location? South Korea. So the team were confident that's where the owner of Welcome to Video was located, and when the crypto exchanges finally got back to them, that lead was solidified. The profile packages that were sent over contained the details of 2 men with their pictures attached. Were the 2 men co-owners of Welcome to Video? The team didn't think so. One of the men was middle-aged and had noticeably dirty hands. He looked more like a farm worker than someone running a site on the dark web. Then there was the other person, a 21-year-old man by the name of Jong-Woo. This, ladies and gentlemen, was Welcome to Video's owner. The 2 men were father and son. It was clear to the team that Jong-Woo had used his father in order to set up crypto accounts that would eventually be connected with Welcome to Video. Even though they finally had their man after weeks of investigating, the IRS didn't authorize an immediate arrest with their Korean counterparts because they wanted to try and trace as many users of the site without raising an alarm.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessie Liu. I'm the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. Thank you all for being here for this very important announcement of significant actions to protect children from sexual exploitation. I'm joined today by key partners in the federal government's fight against those who exploit the most vulnerable among us. Let me be absolutely clear. What we are here to discuss today, the sexual exploitation of children, is one of the worst forms of evil imaginable. Indeed, these crimes are so heinous they are difficult even to speak about. But our government has no higher priority than the safety of our children. For that reason, I am pleased to announce the takedown of one of the world's largest child sexual exploitation marketplaces on the Darknet, Welcome to Video, the seizure of its enormous cache of child pornography, and the unsealing of the U.S. indictment against its administrator, Jong-Woo son. Welcome to Video was a Tor network-based.
And finally, this case is really about three things. First, it's about following the money. This has been our mantra for the last 100 years, and whether the funds are fiat or virtual, IRS-CI's expertise is in tracing money all around the world. Second, it's about protecting our children. Child pornographers prey on the youngest and the most vulnerable in our society. Children who are incapable of consenting to these disgusting acts. These are the bottom feeders of the criminal world. There are no lengths to which we will not go to protect our children from these wretched individuals. And finally, this case is about sending a message to criminals around the world. Not a symbolic message, but a real message. You used to hide by laundering your money through shell companies around the country, but we traced you. You took your money offshore and hid around the world, but we found you. You went on the dark web thinking that your actions were anonymous, but they weren't, and we found you again. You now deal in cryptocurrency, again thinking this will make you anonymous. But our agents have once again proved that there is nowhere that you can hide. We will not stop in our pursuit.
337 people, the majority Korean, were arrested as the result of a joint operation carried out by the IRS, Homeland Security, the National Crime Agency, the German Federal Police, and the Korean National Police. It's difficult to find in-depth reporting about the arrests other than a handful of cases. One user who had been a top priority for law enforcement was a man who had been posting fresh videos of himself repeatedly raping a female child. And although this user was able to access content on Welcome to Video without buying Bitcoin, as he had been racking up points from downloads, he still went ahead and did so anyway. Those Bitcoin transactions were traced through Chainalysis, and ultimately, he was identified. US Homeland Security Border Patrol agent Paul Casey Whipple. It was one of their own. A deep dive into Paul's social media accounts led law enforcement to a GoFundMe page where he was campaigning to raise money to legally adopt his stepdaughter. The GoFundMe contained an image of Paul's stepdaughter wearing a specific red flannel shirt tied around her waist. With this information now in hand, the team went back to see if Paul's stepdaughter was the girl in the videos on Welcome to Video. And there it was, that same red flannel shirt that was in the image on the GoFundMe. When he was eventually tracked down by detectives, Paul initially denied the allegations, but later confessed to them. Although he confessed, as of 2023, reports state that he's still awaiting trial. It wasn't just one Homeland Security agent who was arrested as a part of this investigation though, rather two. Homeland Security agent Richard Nikolai Gratkowski, who was assigned to a squad within ICE to investigate gangs in San Antonio, was found to be an avid user on Welcome to Video. In-depth details about his involvement with the site are scarce, other than he was thought to have used Bitcoin to obtain an undisclosed amount of material from the site. He was eventually tracked down thanks to Chainalysis and would go on to plead guilty to 1 count of receipt of child pornography and 1 count of access with intent to view child pornography. He was jailed for 5.5 years in May of 2019. All Department of Homeland Security employees are held to the highest standards of behaviour and ethics. While ICE does not comment on personal matters, the agency is fully cooperating with the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General regarding this issue. Over in the United Kingdom, a then 26-year-old man, Kyle Fox, had been arrested by the National Crime Agency after he was identified as a producer on Welcome to Video. When officers arrested him at his home, he was found to be in possession of 13,000 images and videos of young children, including toddlers, being raped and sexually abused. Kyle was one of the NCA's top priorities as he was posting videos of himself actively raping a 5-year-old boy and sexually abusing a 3-year-old girl. The young children appeared to be under the influence of drugs in the videos. When officers entered Kyle's home, to apprehend him. The 5-year-old boy who was being abused in the videos was found naked in his bed. It isn't clear what relationship Kyle had with the children, but what is known is that the children weren't related to each other. Kyle Fox was handed a 22-year prison sentence as the result of the Welcome to Video investigation. He's to spend a further 2 years on license when he's released. You sexually abused 2 very young and vulnerable children. Your offences were detected when a video of the abuse was uploaded to a file-sharing website. It came to the attention of officers who were able to trace you from the data. These are extremely serious and depraved offences. No right-minded person could be other than horrified by this appalling series of offences. In March of 2018, Jong-Woo would finally be apprehended by South Korean police for owning the largest child pornography site on the Darknet. For the allegations, he faced a 10-year prison sentence, but the judge would go on to sentence him to just 2 years in prison with 3 years probation. However, that prison sentence was suspended, meaning he'd spend no time in jail. The harm to society is great, but the accused is young and has no criminal history. He repents. In September of 2018, Son was released after receiving that suspended sentence, but the legal battle wasn't over. You see, an appeal was lodged by the prosecution due to the lenient sentence handed down. They felt it was a smack in the face to all of the victims. Considering the things I knew well, I thought the sentence of the first trial was too light and unfair. The second judge handed him an 18-month prison sentence. Son walked free from jail in July of 2020.
맞아? 보여요, 근데? 나이가 좀 있어 보이는데? 오늘
네.
결정 나온 거 어떻게 생각하세요?
정말 죄송하게 생각하고 있고 앞으로 처벌이 남아있는 것도 다하도록 하겠습니다. 정말 죄송합니다.
In October of 2019, it was announced that Son was indicted by a United States federal grand jury in the District of Columbia for the operation of Welcome to Video. He was looking at decades in jail if extradited and found guilty. However, after a lengthy court battle, the Seoul High Court announced it rejected the extradition request on the grounds that having Son in Korea would be more helpful for the country's fight against child pornography. The decision to reject the extradition request was met with backlash. Many members of the public protested outside of the court. Ultimately, though, Son would walk away a free man. Well, temporarily anyway, because in June of 2022, he was handed a 2-year prison sentence for laundering the money he made from Welcome to Video. Yes, he received a longer prison sentence for money laundering than he did for owning Welcome to Video. And so, there you have it. The takedown of a Darknet paedophile ring. When I initially looked into this case, believe it or not, it started with Matthew Falder. I was interested in seeing the first hardcore related case go through a UK court. But upon further research, I noticed that police work dating all the way back to the early 2010s was related to this case and beyond. The first domino would fall at the takedown of Freedom Hosting. The last one we're currently aware of would be the takedown of Welcome to Video. Who knows though? There might be more related cases in the future.